We are live. Hello, everybody. This is episode number 204 of the Wild Edge of Being Human podcast. I'm your host, Allison Crow, and I have Heather Doyle Fraser today. It's been a long time coming. We originally had this scheduled in February, and now it's practically December. Not really, it's
No,
July.
don't say that.
But I'm excited to bring this conversation. And I'll tell you, Heather, you don't know this. What made me go, oh, yeah, we got to reschedule this with Heather was I got off the phone with a past client last week who I've known for a long time. So I know her personality, I know her voice, I know her mojo, I know a little bit about what she's writing and wants to be writing. And I said, listen, normally I'd ask a lot of questions and do all these things, but I am telling you, run, do not pass go, do not stop. I need you to go straight to Heather and work with her. As I'd start out in her program that's coming up this fall, but then you're also going to want to work with her one-on-one. So y'all welcome Heather Doyle Fraser, publisher,
Yep.
of Compassionate Mind Collaborative. Did I say that? I mean, say that right,
Yep.
publishing.
Yep.
And she is also a writer herself and a singer. And she was my book coach. And also, you did a lot of organizational editing for my book, too. So, I want to share a little bit about that process with everybody and why. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, but I want to set the stage that in our industry, there's a lot of wham bam, thank you, ma'am publishing. And then also, towards the end of this process with you, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and that can make writing a book and finishing and organizing really complicated. And this can be a really shitty process if you're not careful with who you choose to work with and how you choose to create and put your creativity out in the world. So welcome, Heather.
Thank you
Glad
so
you're
much. I'm so glad to be here.
here. How did you end up starting your own publishing company?
Oh, okay. Well, I have been in the publishing industry since 1997. It's been
I bought my
a
first
minute.
house.
I know. It's been a while.
It's been a minute.
Yeah. So I started in traditional publishing and was really, I've always been in love with books and reading and writing myself and the relationship that you have when you're holding a book.
Mhm.
I feel like books are all about relationship 100% of the time. Even before I entered publishing, I was in love with books, and that's why I entered publishing. Um, so I spent, until 2010 in traditional publishing. And for me, it just wasn't, when I left, it just wasn't a value alignment anymore for me. And um, it just, I was ready to actually say goodbye to publishing other than publishing my own books. I mean, and write
Mhm.
my own books. I was ready to completely leave the industry. And I took a break, took a job at a university as a project director for a very large education grant. And in that space and time, was able to kind of reevaluate what I wanted to be doing. And when I was in publishing, I was what's called a development editor.
Mhm.
And so that is not a grammar editor. That's not a copy editor. That's not a red line editor. That is an editor that helps you develop your manuscript.
Yes.
Yes.
This is
So,
the part I get excited about because
yeah,
nobody knows what that is. And without that, I would never have finished my book.
yes. That is like someone, a partner with you to help you develop the content, the organization, the flow, the cadence, the strengths of your voice. So whenever I'm coming in to work on a book with someone, I'm looking for, okay, what are the strengths of this person's voice and how can we make the most of those? How can we bring those out even more? And how can we, like highlight that even more? So that's what I did in publishing. Um, Moved up to the point where I couldn't really go much higher in what my current role. I was an executive development editor.
Mhm.
Um, and so I left there I was pretty disillusioned with the whole industry at the time.
Hmm.
And I then again said I took this job with the grant. It gave me the space. And like, even though I was doing this big job, it gave me the space to say, okay, what do I really want to do? And because I had been in that company for so long, I was the person who was doing a lot of coaching and mentoring of new editorial people as they came in, like editorial assistants, development editors, different people like that. And I was also doing a lot with the clients that I was working. I mean, not they weren't clients, that the authors I was working with on their books, because writing is such a vulnerable,
Mhm.
raw, experience, the process, and even when you feel like, "I got this handled, I have this covered," something is gonna come up during the process that is difficult and challenging, and so I spent a lot of time helping people through, quote, unquote, "writer's block," which I think is really just what that is a fear or resistance underneath the writing that you need to work through. And it's not kind of like a it's not good. You're not going to work through that like, I I just need more self-discipline. I just need more will to do it. It's not going to be one of those things usually. Um,
You
so
mean we can't beat the shit out of ourselves into publishing a book?
Not in my experience. I mean, you can, but I don't think that that's the book you're going to want to,
Right,
be reading and writing.
right.
So left that, decided I was gonna go into coaching. So then, because I had done, I had a large part of my job had been coaching people. And so I, went through coach training and was going to open my own coaching business. And
Mhm.
I did in 2012. And I was very clear that I was doing like life coaching and I was not going to be um, doing anything in publishing except for writing my own books.
Mhm.
So then, this is a really long story. Sorry, you didn't know what
Well,
you.
I think it's important, and I always tell. I mean, I've known Heather for a long time, and you you have some really amazing skills that we don't talk about on social media all the time,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
um, and and you also have a history and a credibility that I think is really valuable from your past experience, having worked in the publishing industry, having been an executive in the publishing industry, and I want that.
Yeah.
I want to bring that forward, and it was one of the reasons why I mean, I know you and all that too, but it was also one of the reasons in especially in this day and age where we can all create our own businesses.
Mhm.
And not knocking anybody who's done that, but if you're an aspiring author like I am now an official author. I think before self-publishing was an option, you submitted your book proposals and got an agent and did all these things, and then there's the whole behind the scenes stuff
Yeah.
that could probably be a whole nother conversation. And I know that's not your ethos to just bash a whole industry, but I think we're always comparing um, our inner experience to what we're seeing on the outside.
Yeah.
And you know that, and you know how to translate. So I experience you as having taken your heartbreak from the industry
Mhm.
and the things that you did not like that you saw behind the scenes, and create a space and a loving mandate for that, in your own publishing company.
And
Um,
that is true. Yeah,
yeah.
that is what I do.
So it's okay for it to be a long story. Okay. So
So,
you got the
so
space.
yeah, I started my life coaching practice, and the very first client that I started working with,
Of
uh,
course.
about 2 months into our coaching time together, she was really struggling. She's like, "Ugh, just the thing that's really bothering me is this book. Oh my gosh, I'm writing this book and I just don't even know what to do about." I was like, "Oh, well, we could talk about that a little bit, because, I have this history. I could do, like, let's talk about the book." So I started doing that, and then I started coaching her through the book writing and then developing her manuscript with her and all of the pieces, the raw pieces that come up and rub against each other when you're writing a book. And it worked really, really well. And it just so happened, and I did not market this, but every client that I was getting was writing a book or wanted to write
Mhm.
a book. So then I said, I am going to do this together because it makes so much more sense. And this is what was really the humanity piece of this was really missing in the industry when I was working in it. Um, and I
I have a
also,
feeling it hasn't gotten any better.
yeah, I also was doing obviously my own exploration on different things. And my husband is a therapist, and he
Mhm.
was looking into different modalities, acceptance commitment therapy and compassion focused therapy. And when he was talking about compassion focused therapy, especially, I was like, I do a lot of these things informally, and I want to learn more about this. And they have compassionate, the non-therapy version of compassion focused therapy is called compassionate mind training, very similar to mindful compassion,
Mhm.
um, so mindful self-compassion. So I started going to trainings with him because it's not just their therapy. It's not just in the therapy
Mhm.
um, range. It's also outside of that too. So I started going to some different trainings with him through the Compassionate Mind Foundation, and um, I had the opportunity to actually be with the founder of that modality, Dr. Paul Gilbert, and he was talking about how he created this, and why he created this. And it was in he created this in the 90s, and he said, I created this specifically for people who suffered from extreme self-criticism,
Mm.
shame, and anxiety. And I mean, and that to me, that's like most of humanity or all of humanity. But also, if like you looked at a handful of writers,
Just a handful. Just a handful of us.
hey, that's me. Because I said, oh, that's me. And I'm a writer, and I know my experience with so many people. And so I really started diving deep into that and integrating those practices formally into my coaching
Mhm.
with authors and writers. And it was a perfect match, as I, you know, felt it would be. And I feel like it is, that when we say compassion, I'm talking about the definition I'm using is the ability to see the pain and suffering in yourself and in others, and then the willingness and motivation to do something to help alleviate or prevent that suffering in some way. So if I can help someone to help themselves with that, and realize it's not your fault that you are having these, you know, thoughts, feelings, all of the emotions, everything. It's just because you're human. It's because you're
Mhm.
human that you're
Mhm.
having these experiences. Um, so I started integrating that, and at the same time, at first when I started, I was just doing the development piece. And then I had a couple clients, we got to the, end of the development and editorial piece, and they're like, well, now what am I going to do with this? Like, I need to put it out in the world. And really, up until that point in time, it was very difficult to self-publish a
Mhm.
book, um, because we did not have print on demand. Now we have print
Mhm.
on demand. And that started in that, like, that was becoming very widely available in like 2010 and up.
Mhm.
Um, and so um, I used myself as a guinea pig for the first book that I did, and I, went through, had designer, all of the things. And because I was in publishing, I knew people who had
Yep.
also left. So
Yep.
I had the executive, people who had all the expertise, and they just weren't working in traditional publishing, or maybe they're freelancing or whatever.
Mhm.
So I just kind of like knocked on, some virtual doors and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Do you want to do a project for me?" And brought people in to do all the things that I would be working with them in a traditional publishing house,
Mhm.
just not in that environment. So I started bringing all of those pieces together, and then realized, oh, I have a hybrid publishing company now.
Whoops. Whoops, I created a publishing company. But I love, to me, that says, it's so easy to be intentional about something and cultivate it. And I have a great respect for that. And I often find that we don't see our gifts when we're living in them. And we may look up and realize, oh, this is what I've done by being in my gifts and with the resources available to me. And so that's what I see that you've done. And then since that awareness, obviously you've been very intentional. And
Yes.
I've worked with many of your team members and met a few of the newer people coming on. And I've been through the entire process with you and consulted with somebody on your team about my audiobook. And so I don't even remember. I wish I could remember what I thought writing a book involved before I decided to write a book. But I think I must have known because, like many people, wanted to write a book at 19.
Mhm.
And
Very few people who want to write a book have never, like, almost everybody's thought
right,
about it for a really long time. It's not like they wake up one day and just think like, "I've never, ever, ever thought about writing a book ever, and now I'm going to today." No,
right.
that
Well,
usually.
there's so many. I just before meeting with you, when I was sitting outside, I met with a client today, and without disclosing anything, there was something in the way they showed up, and I felt like it had been a couple weeks since I talked to them. It was like, I don't know. I was like, have I talked to you before? It feels weird, but it was so obvious that they have done a little bit of practice, at least more than once since
Mhm.
we met, because there was a big shift in a certain energy that could only change with practice.
Practice. Yeah. That's
And
practice.
what I now get that I didn't get even, I don't, even short time ago, short meaning 7 years ago, nervous system,
Oh,
which
yeah.
you bring into
Yeah.
nervous system is primary.
Yeah.
Nervous system is primary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then compassionate state of being, but to practice.
Yeah.
And that my brain that's literally what the pause is. Those of you who are listening on the podcast, my brain stops firing because it can't comprehend that somebody would sit down and bang out something and then put it out into the world. Um, whether it's my own limiting beliefs or whatever. And I also know that the kind of book that I wanted to write, and that the kind of book that most of the people I know want to write, there is a relationship
Mhm.
with the author, the writer, the work. It's not just purely functional. And it's a complicated relationship. It's a beautiful relationship. Some days it is um, divorce, threatening, and so it really does require a tending and a care and skill.
Mhm.
And um and the piece that I mean, you have a lot of pieces, but for me, the piece I truly could not have done without was the organizational development.
Mhm.
I think I could have put something out there. I don't, you helped me gather my thoughts into the melody that my book ultimately became. And what's interesting is I use that on purpose because music is not one of my primary languages. There are some people that, um, like my husband, when a song comes on the radio, he starts singing and he tells me to sing, and I get all frozen. I enjoy music, but there's something missing there for me. And yet I wanted my final work have a rhythm and have a congruence and tell a story. And, I didn't want it to read like a computer print off, obviously. And so you were able to help me with song and verse to extend the metaphor and the melody. And then I was like, oh yeah, and she's a singer too, right? Like, but you're able to bring that creative side of you into something very functional, which is a rare gift.
Mm.
Because I can do math, but I can't do math while I'm doing creativity.
Mhm.
And those two combine. Um,
Thank you.
I started out with you. I'm gonna obviously my frame of reference is having worked with you. And I don't remember how many years ago you sent me a message and were like, hey, this class you teach could be a book, and you sent me an outline.
Yeah, I think
And
that was maybe like 2014, 15, something like
probably
that.
14, 15, because that's when I taught that class,
Yeah.
2015, 16, and 17. And I've never written that book, and it probably won't ever be written, and that's okay. But it did introduce me to your compassionate writer process, which I think is a wonderful place for people who are getting to be really serious about writing a book,
Mhm.
to give yourself a little structure and community and experience working with Heather through a process that will set you up for the full on diving in commitment. Do you want to share with us a little bit about that workshop and what it's meant to do? And we'll make sure all the links and stuff are in the show notes. But give us the ethos and zeitgeist and of that course that
Yeah.
you have coming up this fall.
Yeah, it's a 6-week program, and it was I created that to have a, like, group experience for the foundational things that I do one-on-one with every single person that I work with. And I realized I was trying to think about, like, how could I really wanted to have a group program because there's so many misconceptions around what writing a book is like and what writing is like. I mean, it's usually opposite ends of the spectrum. Either
Mhm.
you have this vision of being in a flow state 100% of the time, possibly sitting beside a pond with breeze going through your hair, and maybe you're in the south of France, I don't know. That's one of those that's one of the visions you have, but definitely
Right.
it's that vision of, like, flow, right? It's just
Right. I'm
some
gonna
sort
lock myself in a hotel away from my husband and kids and dogs and all the needs. And on Sunday night, I'm gonna come home with my manuscript.
it's gonna flow, just gonna
No.
be so
Yeah.
flow.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, and the other side of that is, the flip side, so either people think this or they think I have to be in misery, I have to be, like, I need to, like, drown out my sorrows with a drink and, like,
The
that vision
tortured
of, like,
writer.
yes, the tortured writer. So you have these um, 2 kind of contradictory, competing visions that it's out there in our imagination is what a writer looks like,
Mhm.
you know? Um, and so when you're alone doing that, you have no reference for what is typical, really. What
Mhm.
is normal, common, expected, all of these
Mhm.
things. And I'll tell you what, it's not those two things.
And those two things are right for self-criticizing parts, shame parts, and
Yes.
anxiety parts to
Yeah.
really get flared up and active, and mean and even make you quit.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely, and so I
yeah,
really wanted to create a group program so people would feel and see, like, "Oh, all of these questions, fear, doubt, uncertainty, everything that I am feeling is completely right on time."
right.
Everyone is feeling this way when they're doing this. And I can say that. I can say I've worked with hundreds of people and everyone has these experiences. And you are going to say, like, thank you, Heather. That's very nice to hear. I don't really believe you, except for me, not as bad as me. So but when you're in a group together, you hear people say these things and you're like, oh, me too. Me too. So I was trying to figure out, okay, what could I do in a group? Because it is so highly writing is so highly individual. What could I, and the foundational piece is the piece. Um,
Mhm,
so really talking about why you're writing this book. And it's not just like that surface level why that maybe like you've talked about a bunch of times. There's something underneath that. There's always something
mhm.
underneath that. Um, who who you have to be to write this book. You might need to take on a little bit something different in how you're operating in the world to do this. Who you're writing it for. It could be yourself too.
Mhm.
But like these types of questions are really, really important and not to just answer in a moment. They're to sit and reflect on and to really dive into. Um,
They're
and then
really important. The answers to those and the
they
true
must the
answers are
whole thing.
are what either gives you the motivation or absolutely destroys your motivation. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And people don't realize they're going to come back to this foundational work over and over and over and over throughout the whole process.
Mhm.
Um, and we also, look at we create a book plan during this,
Mhm.
basically an outline, but I don't like to use that word because people have flashbacks from, like junior
Yeah.
high and high school. And people are afraid of outlines. They think they're going to cramp their creativity. And it's it's a little bit of constraint that will set you free, really,
Mhm.
what it is.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely. I can speak from experience. Like once that was in, yeah.
you
Yeah.
can see the whole picture. So
You can see the whole picture, and if you get stuck in one area, you can look at your other areas and you don't have to necessarily like, "Oh, okay, this isn't coming today," but you can see another area
right.
that is, because you don't necessarily write a book in order.
No, you don't have to write a book in order at all. You can write even a fiction. I mean, we're mostly talking about nonfiction right now, but even a fiction book, you can write scene. You write scenes,
Mhm. Yeah.
and then um, but so we talk about we do all of that. We also, um, you know, talk a lot about the compassionate practice that you
Mhm.
need to engage in to do all of this. We bring your compassionate other in, your compassionate self in. Um, and the reason is because when you are in threat, when
Mhm.
you are in threat, all you see is everything through the threat lens. 100% of what you see is through the threat lens. So that makes your book really difficult to write if you're
Mhm.
coming from a place of threat. And the threat is your threat system is not like we don't want to eradicate that. We're not trying to take that out. You need that to survive. But
Right.
we need to have enough say internal safeness to be able to have like a toehold on there,
Right.
that where we can feel safe enough to create. And without that, that's what happens when when you're experiencing quote unquote writer's block. You're in such threat and your nervous system is so completely dysregulated that you cannot be with yourself and the page
Mhm.
to do what you need to do.
I would like for you quickly, this is a little piece about dysregulation, because I think there's an obvious dysregulation when somebody is in a big emotional obvious.
Mhm.
But what does invisible dysregulation threat response, what are some of the ways that can show up? Because my experience is I used to say, I remember a therapist asked me one time, actually a psychiatrist asked me, I was doing some meditation and they were like, have you ever experienced any trauma? And I was like, no. And in my mind, I didn't necessarily have the after school special kind of trauma.
Mhm.
And so there was a difference between these big obvious things that are on the Hallmark Channel. And
Mhm.
then now what I know and see are invisible dysregulated states that are quote holding people back, that are
Mhm.
disrupting their lives and work, that can disrupt. So for example, procrastination.
Mhm.
What are
Yeah.
some of the other ones that writers, we wouldn't necessarily see it if you saw them on the street because they're not crying or bleeding.
Right.
But what does that threat dysregulation look like for some of your writers?
Well, I would say procrastination is a big one. People talk about that all the time.
Right.
And I really don't think that a lot of that is true procrastination. When
Mhm.
I feel like when we don't give ourselves enough space in like the landscape of process or time
Mhm.
um, or content,
Mhm.
when you're writing a book, those three landscapes, process, time, and content, um, if you haven't given yourself enough space in all of those landscapes, you're going to feel constricted and feel like there's something wrong with you because you can't deliver, except
Mhm.
that you haven't given yourself the space to fully embody whatever you're trying to write. So,
Mhm.
and everybody has a different process. So when you're first starting to write, um, you won't know what your process is. And so I'm always talking to people about like, let's experiment with different times of day for writing with you. Let's experiment with different, like, what are you going to do before, during, and after
Mhm.
your writing practice? That's really, really important because people don't think about before or after. They just think about
Mhm.
the during. Um,
Mhm.
but the during can't happen if you haven't had some before thought and
Mhm.
after piece for the next time. So, setting yourself up for the most optimal experience that you can have. Not to say that you're not going to still have little pieces that come up but realizing, okay, what do I need to if I am always stressed when let's say, I don't know, pay bills or something. Um, Writing time probably should not come right
After
after
paying
you do
bills
that. Yeah.
or before paying bills,
Or
yeah.
before paying bills, either one. It should not come anywhere near that time. Um, if you feel, if you notice, I really like to have silence or white noise when I
Mhm.
am writing, and yet I always go to a coffee shop to write. Um, that's gonna be a problem. That's not gonna be
Mhm.
an optimal situation, and your nervous system is going to be dysregulated because that's not what's best for you in your writing time.
Right.
Um, but people don't think about that. They just think like, "Well, everyone goes to a coffee shop to write. I need to go to a coffee shop."
Right.
Oh,
They don't think about the other elements of nurturing practice,
right.
that it's really the structures and the exterior structures that create the space for the flow to come through. And like so
Exactly.
you said, we're just thinking about the flow. I can correlate that to so many things in life, right? I've become this structured person, and the me of 10 years ago, her eyeballs boggle because the structure has set me free.
Yeah,
Because when there's a structure or a routine, I'm not thinking about
right,
all those other things.
right.
And so the space left is to write. And so part of my process still, I'll never forget my book published December 8th, was it, or 6th? I can't
6,
6th?
6.
December 6th, on D-Day. Um, and is that D-Day? Did I get that history right? Pearl Harbor, December 6th,
I think
Pearl
so.
Harbor. And on December 7th, I showed up for writing practice, and my husband was like, "What are you doing?" And I said the same thing. He stood in the same place, and I said the same thing he'd said for a couple years before. I said, "I'm going to writing practice." And he was like, "You published your book yesterday." And I was like, "I know, but I'm a writer." And so that is a part of my nourishing practices. Am I working on a book right now? No, but I have continued the writing practice. So that's another offering we can talk about,
Mhm.
um, because you do have your group clients, and then you have some people who have decided to go all in on the whole, like, WHOLE, holistic. Like, it's, I don't want to just say whole process, because it's a whole process
Yeah.
in the best way, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's nourishing. And so Mondays and Fridays are for your one-on-one people
Yeah,
come to
and then
writing practice. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it's open to your one-on-ones and your group people.
yeah.
But there's a group of us that meet very regularly. And it is fascinating because you see other people in an experience that, like, I see other people in an experience I had, and I go, "Oh, I recognize that." Or it validates mine, and it actually neutralizes some of the difficulty, because you realize that it's a part of the process. There's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah, like, one of the things that people don't like, an okay day, an average day, that there
Hey.
was no big aha, there was no big dilemma, there was nothing outside of whatever box. Just an okay day. I came, I wrote, I was done. I did what I thought I was gonna do, and it was fine. It was totally fine. And sometimes people get really nervous when that happens because they're like, there was no like tingles. There was no, feeling of like, I just wrote the most awesome sentence in the world. And that's okay.
Mhm.
Every day is not going to be like that. When you show up occasionally, you have probably more experiences of that like aha moment because you don't do it very often. And then when you do do it all the time, you realize, oh, there are some days where you're just doing the work. And
Mhm.
that's what makes those aha days really awesome. And that also what makes the really hard days tolerable because there's a range here and I can be here for all of it. But you don't know that if you only do it every once in a while. And the thing that gets a book written is
Mhm.
regular writing. And that doesn't have to be every single day, but it has to be consistent and it has to be I mean, like it has to be often. Um, and
Because it becomes a part of your being as you're sitting there talking. I think I even wrote early in the book, is like, who do I have to be to
yeah,
become the woman that has published this book?
yeah.
The publishing is not just a doing, the writing is not just a doing. There's identity and beliefs, and there's a state of being, mind, body, spirit, skill, practice that is behind it. And so all of the things you've set up in your business, which I've participated in all of them, have provide the container, the incubator, the both structure and the caring heart, the direction, the organization, to become, like, I'm a writer. I
Mhm,
didn't just write a book, I am a writer.
mhm.
Um, and now future books seem so much less daunting to me.
'Cause you have
Um,
the practice set. You have the
yes,
practice set.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And, yeah, so and I think there are people out there, if you'd asked me before I wrote my book, I probably would have certainly had some parts that were like, hoping for it to be the Amazon Prime style of flow. But my soul knew that this process would be a relationship with myself in this work of art.
I have said so many times that writing a book is the best self-development you will do. It really takes you
It
through all the things.
it
Takes
is.
all the
And
things.
your right-aligned clients aren't the ones who are gonna wanna write like a machine,
No,
right? Like, we can refer
I don't
you to
I
other
don't
people
want
in the
those.
industry that's not but if you are somebody who that you know that a book and the getting to the book is a part of your soul and soul work, Heather just might be your gal. And so there's Heather, but she also has a team of people. I remember, I mean, I can look at my book now and see it. And somebody was like, "Did you design that?" And I said, "Well, yes and no. I did actually on in a journal page with my watercolors design something and handed it to your designer and she made it into the cover. And
Mhm.
actually everything other than the font is my actual paint and
Right.
she was able to manipulate that. So,
Like,
you
even
have
the strips on the sides of the pages,
this. Yes.
you put that, you painted that, and we gave it to the designer and say, "We want this on the edge of every page."
And
Um,
not that you have to have that, but I
yeah,
was somebody who wanted something very personal, but I don't do like I needed it up leveled. But you have the designers, you have the red line editors, you have I also invested in marketing support with you and your team, and that was so helpful um, in figuring out how to position my book on Amazon. There's a lot of other logistical things that we haven't really spoken about today, but there is this whole service agency that you have,
yeah, yeah.
and that takes so much of the unknown out of there. I remember asking you a question because I had no idea, and my anxious parts would start to, wanting to future solve a problem, and you're like, you don't even have to, it's not even something you have to look up. You just know how it works. So um, I wanted to acknowledge that too. We're coming close to time, so let me take a pause and take a breath. And I want you to pause and take a breath and see what comes. The phrase "your next author" came to me. I don't know who your next author is. I know some of who your current authors are, and some of who are going to be publishing soon.
Yep.
And I know some of the people I'm in the company of having my book published with your publishing company. But what comes to your heart when you think of the next individual you're working with?
Mm. I think, I said this a little bit earlier, but everything is about relationship with me.
Mhm,
Um, and when I can help someone to deepen their relationship with their book, with themselves, with the content that they're writing, um, that is the most exciting, like awe-inspiring thing that I get to do.
mhm,
And that's why I love it so much and stay in it. And because so when I think about the next person, I get when you said like what comes to your I just feel excitement and anticipation around like, who the next person I get to like help them with that relationship. Um, it makes me so happy. It just makes me feel like, oh, I can't wait for that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna do a quick fire answer.
Okay.
But these are hot topic.
Okay.
Chat GPT. I want your honest reactions.
The thing that just came to my head was don't be scared.
Don't be scared. It's so funny because I know a little bit about Chat GPT, and I hear some people say all these things, but as somebody who's been through this process, Chat GPT can never take away the
Right.
process that I went
And
through
so that's
ever.
why I say don't be scared. And for that, I mean, sure, it can string together words. It can, do those things. But for me, the most unique thing about someone's book is their voice. And
Mhm,
that nuance, that lyrical quality, that cadence cannot be copied or fabricated by AI to me.
Mhm.
Um, if you're writing a marketing paragraph about something, okay, maybe, I don't know. But like not a book. This is not what we're doing here. So that's why I said don't be scared. I think that, it has its place and purpose. And that's, if you're doing research on something, maybe that'll be helpful. But not for writing your book. And I'm
Right.
not scared about it.
Um,
I'm
the
not scared.
second the second one that is, I know is a little hot potato is write your book in a weekend.
Oh, ugh. That's my immediate reaction.
I happen to have become friends with Heather over the last 7 years, so I know some of the shit that burns her up.
Yeah, that definitely burns me up. I get so incredibly annoyed with the write your book in a weekend. That's not the type of book that I'm going to be writing. That's not the type of book any of my clients are going to be writing. So if that's the type of book that you want to write, then I would love for you to write that, but not with me.
But there's a desire under your irritation, because underneath all irritation is desire. If you could put the desire into one word, what's the desire?
I would say my annoyance around that is that you're missing out. I want you
Mhm,
to have this full experience, and there's no way you can have it in a weekend. You
mhm,
can have some experience in a weekend, but you can't have
mhm,
this experience in a weekend.
mhm,
You need space in the writing process. It's required. You change during the writing process drastically.
mhm.
You cannot have that reflected in your voice in a weekend. Ugh.
I know, it bugs you. Okay, I'm gonna ask you some that feel good. What are you currently reading that just makes you pee your pants, soulfully happy?
Mm. Well,
I know
I
you're
am
reading a few things, but
yeah, I'm reading a few things. I just finished recently, um, a book by Maggie Smith, which You Could Make This Place Beautiful. That
mhm,
was just I was so exultingly excited about that book and, on so many levels, so, authentic, raw, and the thing that, like, got me her lyrical, style and how she put that book together, the organization of
mhm.
every single little thing, I was just so incredibly in love with. Yeah, so that book, I finished that recently. Wasn't like right at this second, but um, a fiction book that I really enjoyed. It wasn't. I mean, I really enjoyed it. Lessons in Chemistry. That was really fun and really, I enjoyed that little break. I um, I really enjoy reading YA books sometimes too. Get a totally different voice in there. Um, I loved uh TJ Klune's book, the House in the Cerulean Sea. I love
Mhm.
that one. I also really enjoy Percy Jackson series books
We
because
have lots of book friends too.
yeah, because they're just so light and fun and inclusive and um I am currently reading the Trials of Apollo series, which is a few in from the first one, but it's told from the perspective of the Apollo, the Greek god Apollo,
Mhm.
but he's in human form and he starts each chapter with a haiku, which I think is hilarious and awesome, because I think there should be more haikus in the world.
Mhm.
Um, and I have, books of poetry. I have so many, but I could go on for a long time. But there are, I do like if I start to read a book and it is not something that is gonna like improve my life in some way, I'm
You
not
put it
going to.
down.
I put it down
You
because
are somebody who has a very busy life right
yeah.
now, and especially the last 3 or 4 months, you have a daughter graduating and going off to college and a family reunion and all sorts of things, and you are still somebody, no matter how busy you are, and you have a handful of one-on-one clients that are getting close to their pub date where you're doing, the final big edits I mean, you're in all places with all different kinds of your clients. And that's just from what I see. And you still read every single day.
Yes, for fun.
And I love how you remind me there are some mornings when I come to writing practice, and actually reading is the best thing to do for my writing practice. And so that's one thing we can leave you listeners right now with is put down your phone. As soon as this podcast is over, wait till we're done. We're almost done. We're going to tell you how to get a hold of Heather. And you're going to put down the podcast, and you're actually going to pick up a book and read for 20 minutes.
Good writers are good readers. Good writers are good readers.
It helps every single time. And I will say last Friday, and I read a bunch this weekend too, but last Friday I sat down and I was working on the book you were just talking about, You Could Make This Place Beautiful by Maggie Smith. And I read for about 2.5 hours. It was a little broken up in chunks, but I actually read paper book in hand. And there is something magical about that I think can get lost if we're not committed to it. So
yeah.
Awesome. So your website is cmcollab.com.
Yep.
You have your course coming up. You have writer's practice. You have your one-on-one work is all on that website. You've also written and published a couple of books. I forgot that with the intro.
Yep.
Do you want to tell everybody about the books that you've published and written?
Yeah. So I have a daily book called 40 Weeks that I published back in 2015. There it is. It's so pretty. And I love that book. It's really comforting. It's bring you back to kind of regulation place type of book, I think. At least for me it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a companion journal with that. I have also a book that I wrote with my husband called Freedom. It's a book for teens on how to use mindful compassion in their lives. And a lot of the same things that I use with, the practices that I use with my writers are similar to those practices in that book too.
Yeah, it's a very visually appealing book too.
I have a copy here.
Yeah, I was gonna say I have your 40 weeks in my like daily open up and read one a day section. There's Freedom. Yeah, it's a very visually appealing, and if you have a short attention span, it's just broken up really nicely to be able to. Yeah, so I think adults would like it too. Freedom.
We've had a lot of adults say they love it. Whoops.
Yeah,
I'm having trouble with this.
Well, hey, listen, I'm telling you, I've worked with teaching adult skills about things like we didn't have that available to us.
No, boy,
so we were told to stop that crying bullshit and shove it all down. And so I think there are plenty of us adults that it's awesome to have the courage to learn new social, emotional, nervous system, compassionate skills with ourselves. So
yeah.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing, y'all. I cannot tell you enough. I saw one of my fellow writers, Karen Goldfinger Baker, was on here saying hi. It's some of the most valuable work I've done. I'm really proud of my book, Unarmored, and we are coming up on a year since I published my book, and I'm still in your writing practice, and I'm not going anywhere. So, so thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Allison. This has been
You're welcome. Y'all can also find, we'll put all of Heather's social media, The Compassionate. What's your Instagram? Because it's not under Heather Doyle Fraser. It's under Compassionate Writer or The Compassionate Writer.
I think it's just Compassionate Writer.
I think it's Compassionate Writer also. We'll be sure to put all that in the show notes, but you can connect with Heather on social media or through her website. If you have any questions about that process, feel free to ask me. It was holy. And so I highly recommend it. And glad we got this work out into the world.
Yay.
Thanks, everybody.